We also ask that you mute yourselves at this time. Thank you all for attending today's session. My name is Jo Lee. Pronouns are she, her, and I, along with my colleagues Jasmine Shoemaker and Lorraine Ojo Ohaikware, founded the Symposium series AI Privacy and Ethics, Oh My, unpacking the questions surrounding artificial intelligence in higher education. This symposium's inspiration comes from the ever-changing landscape of AI and the need to know information for students regarding higher education. This symposium supports the university's vision of supporting excellence in higher education by connecting innovative teaching, learning, and research. We were intentional with the selection of our speakers, remaining mindful to include librarians, teaching faculty, and students from diverse backgrounds. Our series would not be possible without the contributions of the following centers, departments, and organizations: the Library Freedom Project, UMBC's Center for Social Science Scholarship, the Department of Information Systems, and the Department of Computer Science and Electrical Engineering. Today, we welcome Amy Swackhamer, our fourth speaker of the series. Amy is the Web Services Librarian at the University of Maryland College Park, where she manages website interface design, content management, site evaluation, and other aspects of the websites maintained by the libraries. Over her career, she's helped run the websites of public, special, and academic libraries, as well as other kinds of organizations, learning to wrangle the broad, dynamic array of considerations necessary for enterprise websites. She first became acquainted with the world of shadowy personal data aggregation companies while temping in banking 20 years ago, and more recently started down the rabbit hole of exploring surveillance capitalism and data privacy while looking into concerns about visitor data gathered by external companies through website analytics. Her presentation today is titled Looking Out for Your Data Privacy. And with that, I'll turn it over to our speaker. So welcome again, Amy. I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter so that you can share your slides.
All right, thanks so much, Jo. I'm about to share my screen that I believe has the slides. Can you all verify that you can see that? The presentation, or do you see the
Yes,
notes or just the you actually just see the slides, right?
just the slide. Yes, correct.
All right. Well, I guess I will go ahead and get started here. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for spending your lunch hour with me today. I'm speaking to you from the basement of McKeldin Library at UMD College Park. As Jo mentioned, that's where I work as the Web Services Librarian. I'm a longtime user of a lot of web tools, but only really more recently started digging into privacy in a serious way when I was researching Google Analytics. If anyone is interested in data privacy and website analytics, please contact me. I'll have my email later because it's a topic that I'm happy to talk about. But for today, we're going to focus on kind of a more general, your own personal data privacy, some practices that you can look into or put in place that might help keep some of your data out of the hands of people you don't want it to be in. So we're going to look at why you might care about keeping your data private, who's collecting your data, and why regulations that can impact data collection, areas that you could think about in terms of their impact on your data privacy and how you can improve your practices there, and where you can go to learn more and get guides to how to manage your data privacy. I wanted to add a couple caveats. The specific tools you will use might vary depending on your circumstances, like what operating system you use or other things, what's allowed at your organization. So whenever possible, there's I put together a resource guide that I'll link to at the end, and we can have sent out to you all that links to a bunch of recommendations for different situations. I think those will be helpful. Privacy issues are also constantly changing and evolving. So if you decide that this is something that you care about taking seriously, you're going to need to end up following privacy news. There's just really no other way to stay up to date with things. It changes so much. All right. Background for this. Let's start looking at a couple definitions in the current environment that we're operating in so we get a sense for what's going on here with data privacy. One note, privacy versus security. Privacy is having control over who has what level of access to you and your information. Security is more about the mechanisms that you use to keep your data and other things secure. They're very interdependent. You probably, if you've looked at privacy things at all, privacy and security are often linked in the titles or topics for a lot of things, but we are focusing on privacy today. But some of the things we're talking about are about security because in the digital realm, it's really hard to have privacy without good security. One note, companies and governments often want to help you protect your security from external threats like hackers, but they often have their own reasons for wanting to invade your privacy. So just because something has good security does not mean that it offers good privacy. So let's take a look at who has your data. Big tech, you probably were aware, probably has a lot of your data. You probably know it's notorious for invasive collection of personal data. Most of us likely interact with products from at least one of these companies on a daily basis. I know I do. Um, I think when I talk to people, lots of people are not aware of all the different products and services owned by some of the bigger tech companies. Like Google, you probably know they own Gmail, Google Search, Google Office. You may know that they own YouTube. Lots of people don't know they own Fitbit. They also own the Android operating system. They own those reCAPTCHA, that tool that is used on websites to verify that you're a human when you have to select a picture. They own that. They own Google Analytics that's used on by far the most websites that use analytics. They own Waze, they own Nest, and many more companies. They can use all of those to track you across the internet when you visit sites that use some of those. Um, Meta owns Facebook, Instagram, Threads, WhatsApp, and the Oculus virtual reality. Amazon, of course, has Amazon.com. They have Amazon Web Services. They own Whole Foods. They own Ring and Twitch. Apple has its whole own ecosystem that they kind of keep walled off. But if you use any of the Apple TV, music, Apple Watch, iPhone, the most popular smartphone in the US, then they have data on you. And Microsoft has the most popular operating system for computers and all of the software that comes bundled with that, and also the Xbox. I just wanted to include this slide. It's from another presentation I gave, but if anyone's interested, just to get some sense for the type of practices that Google uses. This is not to say that Google is uniquely bad or the worst. It's just to give you an example of some of the things that they have done that's hostile to data privacy since they were founded. So the one thing I think is maybe the most notable was when they vetoed the W3C consortium's plan to add data privacy as a consideration in technical specifications, and Google has enough clout to have veto power, and they stopped that from being added to the standards for the web. So, right. Who is also tracking you? Almost every company that you interact with, realistically. Phone apps do a lot to track you, your credit card companies, stores with rewards programs, your car manufacturers. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Smart device manufacturers, streaming service providers, your internet service provider. Any company that has a chance to basically will collect your data, because even if they aren't able to do that much with the amount that they can collect, they can sell that data to data brokers and get money. So that is what we'll talk about next. Data brokers are probably companies you have never heard of, you'd never deal with directly, and there's almost no oversight of what they do. They are one of the partners listed in privacy policies, where they say we have permission to share your data with our partners. They sell your data to these partners. They offer things like risk management services, where they build a profile of people based on all the data points they have, and then estimate the probability of different behaviors. They also sell a lot of very specific lists of people to advertisers. In the intro, I think Joe had mentioned in my profile from when I first became aware of data brokers. So I'll just briefly go into that. After 9/11, I was working as a bank temp, and there were new rules about verifying information about people who had opened accounts. And I had this very unpleasant job where I was answering calls from people whose accounts were going to be closed down because they hadn't been set up with the proper amount of verification. I was given access to this third-party data system about people where I could look up all kinds of information about them, like who their family members were, what all their addresses had been, what magazines they subscribed to, what vehicles they own, any property they own. You can imagine all the. And I was a temp who had almost no training, and they had not really vetted me, and I had access to this system. So I just wanted to mention that even back then, it struck me that if the companies that I actually do business with and have a relationship with are constantly losing my data and data breaches and things, these companies that I haven't even heard of really don't have much incentive to keep my data safe. So it's one reason to think about the importance of data privacy. Um, so what kind of data are people gathering about you? What you search for in search engines, what web pages you visit, any demographic information about you. Location data is a really big thing also. Fitness tracker data, like your health metrics, your purchasing history, your driving habits, because your cars are tracking you, your financial information, genetic data, if you've used something like 23andMe, that kind of stuff. There was a big hack of that at some point in recent history. Medical information, if they're able to get that from somewhere where you enter that isn't covered by HIPAA. Photos of your face for facial recognition systems, relationships, like who your family members are, who you live with. Pretty much anything you do online or post online or upload online is being tracked somewhere, if it's possible to track. Who wants access to this data? Um, Advertisers are probably the best known, but political influence campaigns, law enforcement is big users. They big customers of data brokers, and also just watching online information. They also in it. Sorry. In addition to buying data from data brokers, law enforcement can also issue warrants for data, like send me the list of people who searched for this series of search terms who were in this location during this time period, based on their smartphone location data. Current potential landlords or employers, medical insurance companies, car insurance companies, stalkers, and any kind of like criminal online, like an identity thief or ransomware creators, all want to get people's data. I put in a few headlines from stories so that people could see some examples of the kinds of things that happen. One about the cars recording people's location and driving habits. Google Chrome just had a decision against it, and it's misleading people to think that incognito mode wasn't tracking them when it was. Um, the FTC prohibited a data broker from selling what's considered sensitive location data, like mental health service providers, reproductive healthcare providers, addiction clinics, stuff like that. Um, as on a related topic, there was a company that bought the data of people who visited 600 Planned Parenthood locations to target them with anti-abortion ads. The stuff with Roe versus Wade being overturned has been a major concern for data privacy people in terms of being able to use data to investigate women going forward in places where things have become illegal. Um, there's a recent story where there's a company that made a bot for Discord where it joined millions of Discord servers and then scraped all the data and is selling what different users have posted on Discord online if you want to buy whatever comments someone has made on Discord. There's another one where this company is using data that's revealed during the real-time ad bidding process to be able to track individual people by request. And they have data on billions of people. So it just gives you some kind of idea of some of the different things that are concerns here. And I was going to add more news stories, but I ran out of time when I was working on my presentation. So we'll go ahead and move on to this, which today is an exciting topic because there's recent developments here. So let's see. Are there any regulations we have that limit companies and the data that they collect and sell about us? I'm going to start with something that actually does not directly apply to us, but I'm mentioning it because the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation is kind of It's the most famous data protection law and the most litigated so far. A lot of other laws are compared to it whenever you're reading things. There's still a lot of very active defining of what this law means, and it went into effect in 2018. So if it's a topic that interests you, it's worth reading up on a bit. Um, in the US, we have no nationwide data privacy regulations. We do have state level regulations, and they are increasing actually. So you can see from, you might not be able to read everything on this privacy legislation tracker, but the states that appear in green have some type of data protection laws. They vary completely in what type of data they cover. It could be just medical, it could be everything. There's having no standardization is really hard for companies to be able to comply with, and it's hard for people to figure out what's going on. But as you can see, there's the other colors where things are in process. There's a good number of states that are looking at adding some data protection, including our own state, as we'll talk about in a second. Um, just a couple weeks ago, there was a lot of major movement in the US. So um, in Congress, there was a bill introduced as a discussion draft. It still has a good amount of negotiation and discussion to undergo, but at present, it would override the state level privacy bills to supersede them. It would require companies to minimize the amount of data that they collect to only data that they need to perform the functions for um, the service they provide. They would have to disclose their collection practices, and they could not use data that was collected to discriminate against protected classes of people. Individuals would have the right to correct or have their data deleted, but enforcement would be through civil lawsuits by people rather than government enforcement. So this was introduced by the two senators from Washington State, a Democrat and a Republican. It's bipartisan, but we'll see what happens here. But it's exciting that they're talking about it again. Um, it would be nice to have a nationwide regulation on that. Maryland, however, just a couple of weeks ago, passed the Maryland Online Data Protection Act of 2024. It limits companies, again, you'll see like similarities to what the national bill proposes, that they can only collect what's reasonably necessary for the product or service they provide. They can't process personal data for secondary reasons without the consumer's consent. They cannot sell sensitive data, so race, religious beliefs, things about your sex life or sexual orientation, genetic or biometric data, your health data, or your precise geographic location. It bans the sale of data about people under the age of 18. And it was passed by the state legislature, and it's awaiting the governor's signature. It would not take effect until, it says it takes effect in October of 2025, but then when you read it, it says it won't actually impact data processed before April 1st, 2026. So it would be about 2 years away, assuming the governor signs it. But it is, I've seen it frequently described as being like the most comprehensive and strict data privacy law in the US if it's passed, if it's signed into law. So that would really, I think for Maryland, that would be very exciting for us to, kind of be the leader in legislating some limits on what companies can do with our data. I also wanted to mention Maryland Kids Code. This passed unanimously, and it's basically to protect children specifically. There's some overlap with the last law that we just discussed. It's modeled on a law in California, but it expects to have very vigorous tech industry opposition. So did the law in California, which is currently on hold, pending some more legal stuff. So we'll see what happens with the kids code, but there's an additional bill that was passed to try to protect children more robustly than adults. All right. So we're closing in on the end of the intro section here. This slide features Al Franken, just because before I researched this, I didn't realize that Al Franken, because I guess I hadn't been paying attention. Those of you who are old enough may remember when Al Franken was a comedian in Saturday Night Live. He had this character called Stuart Smalley, and a number of other characters. Well, after he left SNL, he was elected to the US Senate, and he was a major privacy advocate. And the person who worked as his legal counsel after he left the Senate founded the Center on Privacy and Technology at Georgetown, and then he's currently one of the 5 US FTC commissioners, which is kind of interesting. The FTC is the federal agency that has the most to do with anything involving protecting our data privacy. To summarize what I've just talked about, currently, most of us in the US lack substantial legal rights to knowledge of or control over who's collecting what data about us, whether it's accurate, how it's stored, combined, or sold in ways that can impact our lives. So since we don't have much that we can do about some of these things, the best recourse is probably to look at ways you can stop your data from being collected in the first place when possible. And that's what we're about to do here. All right, let's get into the more actionable section and look at areas you should consider when you're looking to improve your online privacy. So I just kind of broke this down into different tools or risks, and then list the risks, list what you can do, and then specific tools. VPNs are often recommended. This is because a lot of websites track your IP address and location so that you can be identified, and your internet service provider is also tracking your online behavior, whatever websites you go to and other things you do online. A VPN can anonymize your internet connection so that your ISP can't track what you're doing very well, and it also blocks websites from knowing your real IP address and location. But if you do want to use a VPN, you need to make sure to use a reputable VPN and read reviews of VPNs, because you're really trusting them with all your data instead of your ISP. You may have read that story from a month or two ago where it was uncovered that Facebook had put out a VPN that they really were just using for spyware to spy on how people use their competitors' platforms. So that's just like one example of, like, do your homework if you're choosing a VPN. In the audience resource list that I provided, I provided people who are like well regarded in terms of making recommendations for tools. So I would probably just look through those and pick one if I was thinking about it. Some of them are free, some of them cost money. I will mention when it comes to VPNs that some services block VPNs because it's a way that people get around either being tracked or being accessing tools that they don't have the legal right to use in their current location. Like, you may have heard people say, oh, I'm going to use Netflix when I'm traveling in South America by using a VPN, and it'll say I'm in some other location. So some places will block VPNs, and they can also make you end up having to do additional security checks on some websites. That's kind of a good example of, with a lot of the tools that we'll talk about, you are often giving up some degree of convenience for increased privacy. And when you're thinking about what changes you might want to make, that's something you need to think about, how concerned you are about your data privacy in a certain area versus how much additional hassle it might be, or hassle and or cost, because some of the tools that we talk about are not free and some are. So, all right, to move on to web browsers. Another thing most of us use probably every day. Web browsers process and store a lot of private information that you don't want to be public, like your browsing history, your usernames and passwords, any autofill data you have saved in there. They can reveal identifying information about your location, your system, hardware, and other things to third parties, so that you can be browser fingerprinted, so that people can identify you just by looking at all the details about your browser and knowing, oh, it's that user, because this is how big their monitor is and this is their IP address, and so you can switch to use a secure web browser that, for both your computers and your phones, that will try to prevent tracking of things. One recommendation is to set up HTTPS by default on your browser, whatever browser you're using. It's a setting in most of them, which makes people use a secure connection, like an encrypted connection for websites. Let's see. Another recommendation I've seen is to use one browser for logging into big tech accounts that might be trying to track whatever you do in that browser, and then use a different browser for your web searching and just general internet browsing, so that they're not in the same browser at the same time, where stuff might bleed through that can be collected by one of the big data providers. Some privacy-focused web browsers currently are Brave, Firefox, Tor. Tor is kind of a more heavy-duty one that will be blocked more by some services. Ungoogled Chromium, DuckDuckGo, Vivaldi. There might be a few others, but those are like kind of the top ones that I've heard about and or tried. All right. Another area, a lot of online ads contain trackers that record details of your online activities and any information you reveal about yourself to build profiles of you for targeted advertising or to sell. Ads also can contain malware that infects your computer when the ad loads, which is sometimes called malvertising. This is kind of why ad blockers are so popular. You can use blocking tools that come in a lot of variations. There's browser extensions, there's mobile apps. You can get a VPN that blocks ads or router-based blockers. I've never tried that. Some popular tools are uBlock Origin, Privacy Badger from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Threat Protection from Nord Security, AdBlock Plus, Ghostery. So some of these, when I mention, I'll just mention with the tools over here, a lot of the companies or organizations that work in the privacy space provide a lot of these tools. So some of them may have, they have a VPN, they have ad blockers, they have private email, they have private cloud storage. So you'll probably see the same companies over and over because that's just kind of their brand is focusing on privacy related services. So the Electronic Frontier Foundation, by the way, is a nonprofit, and they've been around for a long time. They're in the audience resource list, and they also provide a lot of guides on ways that you can improve your privacy. Search engines, they track your IP address, your location, they have unique identifier information for you, and they track the searches that you enter in them. So this data can be put, into digital profiles for you that could contain information that you don't want people to be able to find. You can opt to use a search engine that doesn't track you. Some of them operate like other regular search engines, and some of them are called meta search engines, which means that they actually pull their results from other search engines and then just block those search engines from tracking you specifically when they get the results. So there's some listed here: DuckDuckGo, Brave. I'm not sure how that is pronounced, SERPs, or I'm not sure, but some of these are from other countries, which is not surprising. Like I mentioned with the GDPR being such a much more strict privacy protection regulation than we have in the US, a lot of the companies that provide privacy services are in Europe. And I think it's related to them having that legislation that makes that much more immediately relevant over there to lots of companies. I've been using DuckDuckGo for a while. It has been good enough for what I need. I've heard a lot of people complain in recent years about how bad Google search results keep getting, deteriorating, and that they're just filled with SEO garbage. So for those of us who are around during the golden era of Google, that is pretty sad, but at the same time, it makes it less and less problematic to try using other search engines instead, to switch, because I do think from my experience over years on the internet, Google's not what it used to be. You don't need to keep using Google. There's plenty of other options. Give some of them a try. By the way, I didn't mention any of the AI search engines in here. And this presentation really is just focused on data privacy, even though I know the overall series has a very AI focused bent. This is really, AI is not a significant part of what I'm talking about today. Passwords. If you've ever heard anyone talk about security at all, you've probably heard that having good passwords is like the #1 thing to do. Someone who can access your accounts can find or change any information in that account, delete it. And some accounts are kind of keys that let you access a bunch of other accounts. For instance, your primary email might be tied to a bunch of your other accounts. And if someone got access to that, they could change all your passwords. They could close your accounts. It poses great financial privacy and reputational risks if your passwords aren't secure. And so things you can do, obviously the first one is follow password best practices, but this is actually mandated by a lot of websites now. They force you to have long passwords with special characters and uppercase and lowercase. Using two-factor authentication is another one, which is the thing where when you want to log into something, the website will either send you a text or use an app that's a verifier app that you click on and say, yes, I'm trying to log into this service right now, so that it reduces the chance that someone else would be able to do that because they don't have your phone with that app on it. Using passkey identification when available, which involves using your phone. It's not available on all sites. Logging out when you're not in accounts. And then the thing that I'll talk about a little bit more is using a password manager. This is something that basically I'm a big podcast listener, if that hasn't come across yet. And all of the data privacy podcasts and just general tech podcasts I listen to, the hosts always say, I wish I could get people to use password managers. I wish they would just use them. Why don't they understand that this is one of the most important things they can do? So I'm passing along their heartfelt pleas for people to use password managers. And actually, one of the most popular ones, or one of the ones I should say that's most recommended by the tech people that I've listened to, is Bitwarden, and that's free for individual users. So this is a tool where you can use one that's free. What a password manager does is you will, instead of remembering 10,000 passwords, or writing them down somewhere because you probably can't remember 10,000 passwords, you'll have one super complicated long password that you remember, and you log into this service. This service will then auto-generate very strong passwords for you for all of the accounts that you enter. You can sync it across devices, including your mobile device and computers, so that when you log into that, then you can access all your accounts. And a lot of them also can save and encrypt web form data. So if you want to auto fill in fields, that they can do that for you too, like you might otherwise let a browser do if you were not as privacy minded. So that is passwords. Email. Popular email services may allow, some of them have been found to be allowing scanning of email accounts for various reasons by advertisers and developers, which is often not carefully monitored. Like Google, for instance, I think I mentioned in one of my earlier slides, when it first came out and people became very up in arms because Google was scanning the contents of your emails. Eventually, Google, maybe 15 years later, 10 years later, stopped scanning the contents of your email, but then they were letting third-party developers scan the contents of your email. So also, email is vulnerable to hacking and other things sometimes. So one thing you could do is switch to use a privacy-focused encrypted email service. Most of these seem to have a subscription fee, though, and there's some of them listed here. Proton Mail, the first one. Proton is one of the security companies that actually provides a ton of tools and services related to security and privacy. I do want to mention, though, that the privacy of what you send in email is only secure as the least secure recipient's account that's in your email thread. So email is not really the place to send sensitive data. Or if you do, send a link to it that the person can access. Don't be copying it into an email. Social media. There are a lot of privacy related risks from social media. There's a lot of different types of social media. Stalking, location disclosure, personal data collection by third parties, government monitoring without warrants, or impersonation or identity theft is something that can come through social media. Metadata in photos that you upload can reveal when the photo was taken, where it was taken, some other details, and photos can be run through facial recognition tools to identify people. So I think that a lot of the work with social media, to me, is thinking about what you're posting and thinking, is this something I don't want to get out there? Maybe I shouldn't post personal information if it's very sensitive. Make sure to set all your social media profiles to private, unless you're, I guess if you're a public figure, you wouldn't want to do that. That would be a special type of maybe advertising or marketing you're doing. But for most of us who are just regular people, we're going to want to set our profiles to private. We're going to want to look at all the privacy settings for each of the services and think about, do they need access to this thing? Or do I want to let third-party developers access things through this platform? So I'd say reviewing that is one of the top things you can do. And closing accounts you don't use. Don't just leave a lot of things hanging out there that someone could maybe use to pretend to be you or to find old information about you that you never closed and updated. So, oh, I thought I would mention at this point, you might remember Cambridge Analytica, which broke in 2018 when a former employee revealed to news media that for 5 years, Cambridge Analytica had been collecting data on about 90 million Facebook users without the consent of most of them, largely to create psychographic profiles for political advertising for Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. Um, they harvested the Facebook data not only of the people who filled in their survey called This Is Your Digital Life, but also all of their Facebook friends. Facebook ended up being fined $5 billion and 500,000 pounds in the UK. And Cambridge Analytica just declared bankruptcy and folded, but they still, had all that data from all the people that they gathered about all their Facebook interactions. Facebook/Meta in particular has a really bad track record with privacy related stuff. But overall, social media, it just has a lot of problems in this area. Cloud storage. So cloud storage services are a popular hacking target. If you feel that you're a person who needs to store data in the clouds, you can use a cloud storage service that has encrypted keys that you control, so it couldn't be given over to someone else if someone got into it or requested it. Most of these do cost some fee. You can also, of course, alternatively back up data to a physical storage device, but then you have all the issues where, if your house burned down or something happened to someone stole all your devices, you would lose access to it. So if you are a person who stores a lot of data, like I store photos, for instance, you might want to think about looking at more private cloud storage. Smartphones, probably almost all of us have one. The apps on smartphones very frequently gather excessive data so that they can sell it. Location data is one of the most personal types of data acquired through smartphones, since many people always have them with them. This can show where you went, how long you were there, and who you were with. If someone could get your location data, they basically can find out where you live and where you work and maybe any other hobbies you have or activities pretty quickly. So to minimize risks for losing data through your smartphone, you can keep your phone securely locked. Remove apps that you don't want is a big one. If you don't use an app, you don't need it, and it's probably trying to get some data from you. It's taking up space on your phone. Look at the app permissions for the apps that you want to keep and remove unnecessary access to things like your location, your contact list, and your photos. You've all probably experienced this where some app is supposed to, I don't know, help you do yoga exercises, but it wants to have your contact list and it wants to have your photos and it wants to know where you are, and it doesn't need to know that. So you can often just disable that. Most, or actually I should say, iPhone and Android phones have a setting somewhere. You can look up how to do this on the different phones to opt out of ad personalization, which is really opting you out of additional data collection. And then I listed a couple tools here. There's the iVerify app, which gives you advice about settings. It'll look at your phone and say what settings you should maybe enable to improve your privacy. It also will give you guides to private use of your phone, and it also has news, privacy related news in it. There's a kind of new feature, a couple months old, from Apple called stolen device protection that basically is, I've seen universally recommended to turn on as soon as you can. If someone stole your actual phone, but they also had watched you and gotten your passcode, apparently there was a trend where people were doing that and then they were locking the person out of their Apple ID. Then they have access to their Apple Pay, all of their accounts that are connected through Apple. If you have stolen device protection turned on, that the goal of that is it thwarts people. They might have your phone, but they're not going to be able to get into all of your accounts if you go in and change the password immediately. So also recommended for smartphones. The Internet of Things. Um, so we all have, or I shouldn't say all, many of us have a lot of these devices that are smart, and they want to connect to your Wi-Fi. And there's a wide array of things that's referred to as the Internet of Things. Smart speakers, smart TV, smart watch, many other network devices might be recording and transmitting what you do or say and monitoring the activity on your network and sending it back somewhere. One thing I've seen a number of privacy people say is when you see the word smart, it means surveillance. So whenever someone tries to market something to you as being smart, just think, oh, this is something that has the ability to surveil me. One thing you can do is research the privacy for network products. They're not all created equal. Mozilla actually has a website called Privacy Not Included that is very handy. It has devices in a bunch of categories, and they review the privacy settings of all these different devices and the privacy reputations and histories of the manufacturers, and then will give you input on here's the smartwatches that are the most private, or here's the speakers, or whatever category of device you're looking. So I would say researching that if you're thinking of purchasing something is one thing you can do. Another thing I've seen recommended is put your devices, make a guest network at your home, and then put the IoT devices on the guest network, not the same network as your computer. So if they're trying to intercept data, they'll be on a different network than you're usually using. Um, oh, I thought I'd mentioned that we had to replace a few appliances at my house over the past few years, and every single one of them was smart and wanted us to download apps and connect the device to the Wi-Fi. But the features they were offering were things like, well, you could start your dryer while you're about to leave work, so your clothes will be dry when you get home. Or you can preheat your oven before you get home. And to me, I think you have to think about the trade-offs. Is any security risk worth just having your clothes dry by the time you get home? To me, it's not. And we don't have those things enabled, but it's something that you would want to consider if you're purchasing any kind of smart device. I put cars in this presentation, even though I don't have a lot of good advice about what you can do about cars, but I just wanted to raise general awareness. If you follow privacy news at all, there's been a lot of reporting recently on your cars tracking you. If the privacy policies, this is actually something Mozilla did. Um, but also there have been a few companies that went like in pretty exhaustive detail to try to figure out what's going on with privacy policies. They're extremely broad and often give the car manufacturer the rights to capture any data that you generate while you're in the car, your phone data, if you're connected to the car, things like the texts you send, like anything that you do in your car. The thing that's really been rankling a lot of people is that car manufacturers are tracking people's driving habits. They're tracking where they go, when they go there, how fast they go, how much they brake, what kind of driving style they have, then selling that to data brokers. The data brokers are compiling that and selling it to insurance companies, and it's causing some people's insurance rates to go up. There's not really a lot we can do about this. That's just, it seems like almost all of the car brands available in America have this issue right now. But if you do end up buying a car the next few years, you might want to do a little research and see, are there any that are better? Would anything impact my purchase decision related to data privacy in cars? I wanted to mention a few trends, and I probably should have put AI on this slide at minimum. Um, One thing is that it seems like there's an increase in the amount of wearable technology that has recording capacity that's being put on the market. You may or may not know that Meta sells smart glasses now that are only $250 and look like normal glasses, but they can record audio and video of whatever the person wearing them is looking at. Um, Facial recognition technology also seems like it's becoming increasingly common. It's definitely becoming increasingly used by law enforcement. And if you're interested in that topic, there is a really great book by Kashmir Hill, the New York Times tech reporter, called Your Face Belongs to Us. That's on the audience resource list that I made, but I do recommend that one. It's pretty creepy, but it's good to know about. So after going through that list of things, you might be thinking, that's too many things for me to deal with. I can't do all of that. And that's fair. We all have a lot of demands on our time and things to figure out. So I think that the place to start is to think about what data do you have that you think might need protection the most, where you could actually do something about it? And who do you think might be the people who would want that data that can inform where you get started and different um, areas or tools that you might consider, and then how much inconvenience you're willing to accept. Because if you really go all in on privacy, it's a pretty steep climb. There is to really lock things down is pretty difficult in the world that we live in. So I think you have to prioritize things. Consumer Reports has an online security planner that is pretty helpful, where you ask it asks you questions. It's like a wizard asking you about different activities you have, things you think are important for you to protect, and then it gives you a list of recommendations to get started on improving your data privacy. Consumer Reports overall does a lot of work in investigating consumer data privacy. So they're a good resource, and you probably have access to them either through your academic library or your public library if you're interested in looking in that publication. For tools that aren't free, I just wanted to mention as an aside, you can often find discount codes online. A lot of the podcasts that I've listened to have discount codes for certain products. Websites for privacy and security often do too. So you might be able to get a discount if you take the time to look around. A lot of them aren't that expensive, but we're always all trying to save money. So I just thought I'd mention that. Now, if you feel that you have finished all this stuff and want to try to contribute to improving the situation that we're all living in, I have a few additional recommendations. So, whenever it's possible, use products and support organizations that align with your privacy values so that you can support them and make them more commonly used. Keep learning about privacy topics. There's a lot of different places to learn. There's news sources in the list that I'll link to. Help your friends and family learn to protect their privacy, because all of our privacy is really connected. The people around you can easily share things that might also reveal where you are, information about you. So help out the people around you. Contact your legislators to voice support for privacy regulations, especially now when there's actually like active discussion in Congress. You might want to reach out to your national level representatives, the ones in Maryland. If you live here, you could just send them a thanks for voting for these laws that will hopefully protect our data privacy better in Maryland. And support technology journalism if you have the chance, because this is how we find out about a lot of the things that happen and a lot of the things that we need to do. And without journalists, we would just be unaware. So this is my final slide. And there's a QR code that will take you to the audience resource list, also the bit.ly link. Does anyone have, oh, and my email is here. If anyone wants to follow up with me about anything, I also welcome your questions. Does anyone have any questions right now?
Thank you so much for your presentation, Amy. And yes, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to either unmute or type them into the chat.
I have a question. Amy, it's Judy.
Hey, Judy.
Hi. Do you yourself use one of those password managers and all these other things? And if so, which one do you use for the password manager?
I use Bitwarden because, well, one, it's open source and free, but it also just is something that a lot of the people whose podcasts I like and I think they seem sensible seem to recommend that one as one of the top choices. So I figured getting started, I don't use all of these things. I still need to figure out, I will use a privacy browser and search engines. I feel like there's a long ways I have to go in terms of figuring out, like I don't use encrypted cloud storage currently. Well, I do, but it's not as securely. I use iDrive for cloud storage currently, but that's just to back up my computer. Um, so I feel like there's some areas while I researched it for this presentation, I still need to personally like take more steps to improve some of my practices.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Amy, I have a general question. I got to know you through our mutual involvement with the Library Freedom Project and
Mhm.
privacy and things like that. But I'm curious as to how you got maybe interested in this topic. What kind of sparked your interest here for this research?
Oh, well, so when I started at UMD, I got asked to look into privacy concerns about Google Analytics. And so I read a little about it and then it just became like a rabbit hole issue where you're like, well, wait a minute, why are they doing that? And then, and then I read Surveillance Capitalism, and it's really infuriating, but very long book. And it made me essentially it's one of those topics I feel like you can really get hooked on. So then I'm like, well, I'll just listen to a few podcasts. That way it'll quench my thirst for learning about this. And it just kind of, but I feel like there's still so much, it's such a wide topic. It touches so many areas of our lives because more and more things are online. And so I feel like I'll be able to keep learning about it forever if I want to. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Amy, I believe we have a question from Roberto. I think they have their hand up.
Okay.
Oh, hi. Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for the talk. Very interesting. Just to give a bit of context, I'm a professor in computer science and I do research on data privacy and I teach a data privacy class at UMBC. So it was a fantastic summary. I was missing when you were talking about who's collecting data about us. I missed there the university, right? So
Oh, that's true.
by being part of the university, there's data that is being collected about us, right? And I wanted to hear your opinion about this and what can we do to protect ourselves when, for example, we are forced to use like WebEx right now, or we are forced to use like Blackboard or other applications, right? Like when there's situations where we don't have a choice.
That's a great point. Um, I feel like I haven't seen a lot of that. Because I work in libraries, another area that touches on that is the the third party tools that we subscribe to. A lot of them are tracking people. So even like we moved off Google Analytics for our website, but then the databases and things that we use they're using tools that are tracking people, and we can't unsubscribe from our article databases. I don't have a lot of answers on that, unfortunately. I know that there are some people working, like in libraries, for instance, the group Spark is working on putting together groups of people to negotiate contracts. And I feel like that's really we probably have to work from within an organization, like talk to other people, say, hey, we're a big university system. We should be able to negotiate with the people who provide services to us about what we don't think is a good use of people's data, or that, so that's kind of where I'm at, but I feel like I'm not super well informed in it.
Thank you.
Amy, you had mentioned podcasts earlier. I was wondering if there were any of your favorites you'd like to recommend about technology, data privacy.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So I did put them on the audience resource list. I would say, so I really like one called Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. The guy who hosts that one actually quit his job to work full time on instruction related to privacy and security. And he wrote a really giant book. He keeps all of his episodes, have very meticulous notes of all the stories he talks about. Another one that has a lot of stories is the Surveillance Report Privacy and Surveillance podcast. It's a very fast paced privacy news podcast, well, privacy and security. Really great. They also have good notes on everything that they talk about. A lot of general technology podcasts. If you're someone who's not super into privacy, but you want to hear about some of the top stories, I feel like there's like Hard Fork is overall a super great tech podcast. It's a New York Times podcast, and they do talk about AI a lot. If you're also interested in AI, they'll cover some of the more prominent privacy stories, and they make it they have really interesting people they interview, and like lots of great anecdotes and things included to make things seem really, relatable so you can understand a lot of the topics. Um, I also am a big fan of This Week in Tech from Leo Laporte, which is that's a super long podcast, so it might not be for everyone. I think it's like 3 hours a week or something, but he brings on a different panel of people every week. But that's a general technology podcast, but they do talk a lot about security and privacy. So those are some that I would recommend.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those recommendations. I'm definitely going to check them out because your presentation was just so stellar, very informative, and just a little concerning, just a little. So I'll definitely be doing a deep dive of the podcast that you recommended and also the wonderful resource list that you provided. So thank you so much for taking the time to come and present today. I'm going to go ahead and hit stop record.